The wind howled through the pines, carrying the kind of chill that sank into your bones and made you question why you'd ever left the city. I, Elliot Harper, 25, a graphic designer with a penchant for overthinking, stood at the edge of a cliff in the Blue Ridge Mountains, staring into a valley that seemed to swallow the world whole. My best friend, Caleb Monroe, 26, a firefighter with a grin that could charm a bear, was somewhere behind me, probably wrestling with the tent poles and cursing under his breath. This trip was his idea. Caleb had been itching to escape Richmond's concrete jungle, his eyes lighting up when he talked about the mountains, the stars, the kind of freedom you only find when you're miles from Wi-Fi. I'd agreed, not because I loved hiking, honestly, I'd rather sketch than sweat, but because I'd follow Caleb anywhere. He didn't know that, of course. To him, I was just Elliot, the guy who'd been his shadow since high school, the one who laughed at his dumb jokes and never let him pay for coffee. But to me, he was everything. A secret I'd buried so deep it felt like a bruise I couldn't touch. Elliot, you gonna stand there brooding all night or help me with this tent? Caleb's voice cut through the dusk, warm and teasing. I turned to see him wrestling with a tangle of nylon, his blonde hair catching the last of the sunlight. He was all broad shoulders and easy confidence, the kind of guy who made everyone feel safe. I forced a smile, shoving my hands into my jacket pockets to hide the way they trembled. Brooding's my cardio, I shot back, jogging over to help. We worked in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt comfortable, like an old song you both know by heart. The tent went up, lopsided but sturdy, and soon we had a fire crackling, casting shadows that danced across the clearing. Caleb pulled out a flask of whiskey, passing it to me with a grin. To surviving the wilderness, he toasted. I took a swig, the burn grounding me. To surviving you, I said, and he laughed, loud and unguarded. That laugh, it was my kryptonite, the sound that had kept me tethered to him through every unrequited moment. I'd spent years telling myself I was fine just being his friend, that I didn't need more. But sitting there, with the firelight flickering in his hazel eyes, I wasn't so sure anymore. The first night passed in a blur of stories and whiskey, Caleb recounting his latest heroics at the fire station while I sketched the outline of the mountains in my notebook. He leaned over at one point, peering at my drawing. "Damn, Elle, you're good," he said, his voice soft with something that felt dangerously close to admiration. My heart stuttered, but I brushed it off, muttering something about practice. He didn't know how often I sketched him, his profile, his hands, the way his jaw tightened when he was deep in thought. Those pages stayed hidden, locked away like the truth I couldn't voice. The next morning, we set out for a trail Caleb swore was life-changing. The path wound through dense forest, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. I lagged behind, my sketchbook tucked under my arm, stealing glances at Caleb as he forged ahead, his enthusiasm infectious. He'd stop every so often, pointing out a hidden waterfall or a deer darting through the trees, his excitement making the world feel brighter. I wondered if he knew how rare that was, how most people trudged through life, but Caleb lived like every moment was a gift. By midday, we reached a lookout point, a jagged outcrop with a view that stole my breath. Caleb spread his arms wide, like he could hug the whole damn world. "This, Elle," he said, turning to me. "This is why we're here." His grin was reckless, and for a moment, I let myself imagine he meant more than the view. I pushed the thought down, focusing on the sketch I started, capturing the sweep of the valley and the tiny figure of Caleb against it. That night, the air turned colder, the stars sharper. We sat by the fire, closer than the night before, our knees brushing as we passed the flask. Caleb was quieter, his usual bravado replaced by something introspective. "You ever feel like you're running from something?" he asked suddenly, staring into the flames. I froze, the whiskey halfway to my lips. "All the time," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You?" He nodded, his jaw tight. "Yeah. Like I don't know who I'm supposed to be sometimes." His words hung heavy, and I wanted to reach out, to tell him he was enough, more than enough. But I didn't. I just listened because that's what I always did, listened, loved, and stayed silent. The third day brought rain, a steady drizzle that turned the trail to mud. Caleb, undeterred, led us to a cave he'd read about, a shallow hollow carved into the mountainside. We ducked inside, soaked and shivering, laughing at our own misery. The cave was cramped, forcing us to sit close, our shoulders pressed together. I could feel the heat of him, the steady rise and fall of his breath. My heart was a traitor, pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. "Elle," he said, his voice low, "you're the only one who gets me, you know that?" His eyes met mine, and for a moment the world stopped. I wanted to say it then, to spill everything. How I'd loved him since we were 17. How every laugh, every glance, every shared moment had built a home in my chest. But fear clamped my mouth shut, and I just nodded, my throat tight. The rain stopped by evening, and we emerged to a sky painted with streaks of pink and gold. Caleb suggested we climb to a higher ridge for the sunset, and I followed, my legs aching but my heart heavier. At the top, we sat on a flat rock, the valley sprawling below us like a promise. Caleb was quiet again, his hands restless in his lap. I sketched him without thinking, my pencil tracing the lines of his face, the weight of everything unsaid. "Elle," he said suddenly, turning to me. His voice was different, raw, unsteady. What if I've been wrong about myself?" My pencil froze and I looked up, meeting his gaze. His eyes were wide, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. What if I'm not who I thought I was? I didn't know what to say, didn't trust myself to speak. My heart was screaming, but my voice stayed locked away. He reached out, his hand brushing mine, and it was like a spark igniting kindling. "Caleb," I whispered, my voice breaking, "what are you saying?" He didn't answer, not with words. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath warm against my cheek. The world narrowed to the space between us, to the moment his lips met mine. It was tentative at first, a question, but then it deepened, and I kissed him back with everything I'd held back for years. The mountains, the stars, the whole damn universe faded away, and it was just us, two hearts finally colliding. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath ragged. "I didn't know," he murmured. "I didn't know it could feel like this." I wanted to laugh, to cry, to tell him I'd known it all along. But instead, I just held him, my fingers tangled in his jacket, afraid to let go. The night stretched on and we talked, really talked, for the first time, about his fears, his doubts, the weight of expectations he'd carried since he was a kid, about my silence, my love, the way I'd built a life around him without ever saying it. The fire burned low, but the warmth between us was enough. The next morning, reality crept in. Caleb was quieter, his eyes shadowed with something I couldn't read. We packed up, the air heavy with unspoken questions. Was this real? Was it just the mountain air, the whiskey, the stars? I didn't ask, and he didn't say. We hiked back down the trail, side by side but miles apart, my sketchbook heavier with every step. Back in Richmond, life tried to snap back to normal. Caleb went back to the fire station, I went back to my deadlines, but nothing felt the same. We didn't talk about the kiss, not at first. I saw him less, each coffee date canceled with an excuse that stung more than the last. I started sketching again, darker this time. Storm clouds, jagged cliffs, a figure standing alone. One night, he showed up at my apartment, soaked from the rain, his eyes wild. "I can't stop thinking about it," he said, his voice breaking. "About you." My heart stopped, then started again, faster. He stepped closer, and I saw it, the fear, the hope, the same chaos I'd felt for years. "I don't know what this means," he said, "but I know I don't want to lose you." I pulled him inside and we talked until dawn. It wasn't easy. Caleb was still untangling himself, still figuring out who he was beyond the labels he'd worn like armor. But he was trying, and so was I. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, and that was enough for now. Months later, we went back to the mountains. Not to escape, but to remember. We stood on that same ridge, his hand in mine, the wind carrying away the last of our doubts. The stars were just as bright, the valley just as vast, but we were different, stronger, braver, together. I sketched us there, two figures against the horizon, and for the first time I didn't hide the page. Love doesn't always come with a map, but it finds a way. For us, it started with a mountain, a kiss, and one night that changed everything.